Now Shri Suresh Prabhu.
Thank you, sir. I also thank my colleague member for initiating a discussion on a subject which normally doesn't get discussed in the Parliament. A subject of such great importance where the country's interests are being furthered in terms of foreign policy. We hardly discuss such an issue in the Parliament, and more so because the foreign policy is something which we actually pursue, really takes a country's direction in a particular manner, which takes long time to correct or trying to rectify. And therefore it is really important, and I wish to thank my colleague for initiating a discussion on this subject. Sir, foreign policy of any country, and definitely for India also, has to further the interest of the national interest of our country into foreign affairs. And therefore, foreign policy success will largely be determined by the fact whether we are pursuing our domestic interest to our own advantage or not. And I think this is the one of the tests on which we can be able to determine how far we are really succeeded. So many of my colleague members have talked about political issues which should dominate a foreign policy, and inevitably so. You can't just have a foreign policy which is isolated and segregated from the political issues of the country or the world. But I think we also need to try to encompass so many other concerns that are now there in the world, we should also get reflected in the foreign policy. Sir, first of all, I think we must now make a very good use of our strength which actually can be used to our own advantage. For example, sir, economic development of a country which is dominating the foreign policy, obviously. We want to develop, US is so powerful, and everybody has mentioned about United States. It's so powerful because it's economically powerful, and we cannot wish it away. Somebody is saying that we are trying to foreclose our India's interest in favor of the United States. But sir, India's interest lies in making sure that we don't make enmity with a country which is so powerful. And therefore, India's interest is certainly be served by the fact that where we actually grow economically. So that is one way that we should do it. So other sector in which we must actually take into consideration, and actually it is the diplomacy is going to be dominated by that in the years to come, is environmental issues. Sir, actually in India has a great advantage in terms of ensuring that now, so the world over, the issue that get discussed, one is economic issue, the other is environmental issue. So in environment we have a great advantage because India is not a country which can qualify to be the G7 club. But India is a country, along with Brazil and China, which is growing so fast that environmental impact of that growth is going to be felt by the rest of the world. So we can definitely leverage it to our own advantage and say that India is going to be making use of this strength. We are not a G7, but we are P7 because we have a potential to pollute. And if we cannot actually use this to our own advantage, it will be thing. So secondly, we must also make sure that the Indian community, the Indian diaspora all over the world, how we can use that diaspora to our own advantage. We have been now holding Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, which is one of the very welcome things. The mainland, they can come back to mainland. They realize that the mainlanders really respect them. They are concerned about them. But the same way, sir, we must also find out how the non-resident Indians can be used as our ambassadors in ensuring that India's interests are taken forward. So I am aware of the fact that the India caucus in US Congress is so strong now, it has multiple members. This has happened because the Indian diaspora living in the United States could influence them to join this India caucus. And therefore the same way we should try to use it. And also the scientists who are actually all over the world, and this world now dominated by science and technology. It's a new knowledge economy which is now influencing the world. We should try to find out how the Indian scientists can be used to our own advantage because they really matter all over the world. Sir, our foreign policy has to be closer to our own borders first. We must ensure that our neighbors are our good friends. We are actually concerned right now about what's happening in our neighbors. Bangladesh, everybody has mentioned. So we are very surprised that we are actually concerned that what happened in Bangladesh is of a great concern to all of us. So there have been attacks on the former Prime Minister of Bangladesh. She, with the great help of God's own hand, that she escaped an attempt on her life. But otherwise, she would have probably not been there today. The minorities in Pakistan are being targeted, in Bangladesh are being targeted. The media in Bangladesh is being targeted, and this has a great impact on India's relations with Bangladesh. I am really concerned about what's happening in Bangladesh, and I'm sure the government of India would ensure that our concerns about Indian Parliament's concern about what's happening in Bangladesh would be taken note of in framing our foreign policy. So Pakistan, one of our other neighbors, we are actually confused right now because the government is sending little confusing signals. On one hand, we are saying that when we want to talk to Hurriyat, we are willing to talk to them without any condition. We can talk to them on anything. At the same time, the Prime Minister has already said in Jammu and Kashmir that the territorial integrity of India, and in terms of ensuring that we are not going to redraw the geography of the country, and that is in response to the statement which was made earlier by General Musharraf. So how that is the problem of Kashmir, which is central to Indo-Pak relationship, how that is going to be affecting the foreign policy is something which we'd also like to know. Sir, the United States has also always been saying that India is a friend of United States, but surprisingly, whenever they claim that, they give us a very good verbal support. But in terms of actual action, we have been saying that now Pakistan is a beneficiary of a great largesse from USA in terms of arms, in terms of financial support. So how actually this is going to be reconciled? How on one hand we have got good relations with United States, and in fact my colleague Mr. Rushpan Charles just read a statement, a letter which was written by our Prime Minister to the President of Bush congratulating him on his re-election, and he just read out that letter. So I would like to find out how we are going to reconcile these apparently conflicting statements and this in relation to our domestic interest. Sir, in terms of ensuring our neighbors, this Bangladesh is one. What is happening in Nepal is of a great concern to us. People are already talking about a corridor between those Maoists in Nepal with the Naxalites in India. And if that's something which is going to happen, probably 1/4 of India's districts, out of 600 districts, probably 120 districts are now infected by the Naxalite menace. So how that is going to affect India's interest, and how what is happening in Nepal will be ensured that that will not have adverse impact on India's security is something which I like to really know. Sir, I would request the government to make a periodically an assessment of India's foreign policy, and like we have got a Fiscal Responsibility Act in which the Finance Minister is obliged to make a statement before the House saying what is the state of the economy. The same way I think on foreign policy, I think it is a good idea that the government must take the Parliament into confidence, spell out very clearly what are the short-term, medium-term and long-term objectives of the foreign policy and how they are moving in that direction. This will ensure that such debates can be carried out in probably twice a year or 3 times a year, and that will also ensure that the foreign policy of India would be participatory in nature. Sir, after the neighbors, I would like to say that some members have mentioned about our membership with ASEAN. Sir, in fact, we share a border with Myanmar, which is a member of ASEAN. And I think, really speaking, if Turkey can become member of European Union, they want to become member of European Union because part of Turkey lies in European continent. The same way, if you can really look at it, India's long border with Burma, with Myanmar, actually should really qualify us to be a member of this. So we should not be a dialogue member really. We should be, really speaking, a full-time, full-fledged member of the ASEAN, and I think the government must pursue that only for one reason, is that while the world, we are talking about through WTO, all the borders are dismantling, the goods and services can move without any hindrance, but at the same time new trade blocks are being created. It should not happen that India is left out of these opportunities, and probably the new initiative which was initiated by the India government, which is now pursued by this government, of having an FTA with the ASEAN should be pursued very vigorously, but at the same time also that the long-term interest, as I said, the short-term, the medium-term, the long-term interest should be how we can become a full-fledged member of that. So China, another neighbor of ours, and in fact the foreign minister the other day while replying to a question in the parliament has said that while we are committed to resolve the border dispute with China, we also would like to further our economic relations with China. I am sure we can't miss out an opportunity with China, which is the now fastest growing economy of the world, which is growing so fast that probably one day it will be probably surpassing the US economy within the next few years' time. But therefore, our relation with China also assumes great importance. I think on a long-term basis, as I said again, short-term and long-term, while short-term what the policy the government is pursuing, but on a medium-term and long-term, we should also explore the possibility how whether we can have a common market with our close neighbor, which will really put us to great advantage, because India and China, the two largest populations of the world, which will be more than 33% of the global population. Between India and China, 16% of India's population, about 18% world. So more than 35% of the global population, if they have a common market, it can influence the world economy in a very significant way. So our relationship with our Latin America is something which I think we need to strengthen. We are going east, we are already in west, but I think how we can now strengthen relationship with Latin American countries is of great importance to us. It is not just Cuba symbolically that we should be talking about Latin America. It should be a very comprehensive package in which our neighbors, our friends in Latin America, some of the traditional friends in Latin America should not be talking to us because the language they speak and language we speak are different. And therefore we really need to pursue it very aggressively. Sir, I would like to find out about, we have hardly mentioned about that. So Commonwealth is a platform that is available to us. The Commonwealth is created out of when the empire was crumbling, it actually reassembled on a platform of Commonwealth. Sir, how the Commonwealth, we can use it to our own advantage. Have you really thought about using Commonwealth platform as a part of a diplomacy? Is something which I would also like to be enlightened by the Minister. Sir, there are 3-4 small things I would like to mention. One, when we talk about foreign policy, there are principles, there are ingredients, and there are strategies. But to exercise all this, we need some instruments. So one of the instruments that is available to us is our own missions that are there in many parts of the world. So India is one country, which is one of the few countries which has so many missions all over the world. Probably not many countries have as many missions as India has got. Now, these missions should play a useful role. Sir, is the government thinking of ensuring that there is some accountability on this mission, minimum output that these missions must produce, the exports, which is our major priority, to ensure that technical cooperation between countries really happens? Can we not actually quantify the output that is expected from each of these missions? At the same time, we also provide the necessary training for the personnel in that mission to accomplish this output. Because this traditional diplomacy of only concerning politics is no longer valid. It has to be multidisciplinary. As we are talking about multipolar world, the multidisciplinary diplomacy is this order of the day, and to pursue that, the training is required. And therefore, whether we are also thinking in terms of, at the time of entry itself, the foreign service officers, not just the IFS officers at class A, but even other officers, other personnel in the Foreign External Affairs Ministry, whether they will be given training to equip them to deal with these different challenges that the world is facing. At the same time, whether we are also thinking about creating some specialized service personnel. For example, I mentioned earlier in my speech now that environment is growing as a major policy issue. Whether we can think about training some people, like we have a language specialization, the officers have to learn a particular foreign language. The same way can we think about specializing some officers only in economic diplomacy, in the diplomacy relating to environment, or something like this. I would like to know, and if that is done, that will be of a great help. Sir, our remembering about our old past, wherein those days we were a leader of non-aligned movement, and we are very proud of that. Now, unfortunately, those non-aligned movement no longer is valid, because even if we want to be holding the non-aligned group together, the others are already aligned with the group. That is the reality of life which we must accept. And therefore, those days, one of the great advantage we had is to invite foreign students from Africa, from Asia, to come and study in India. Many of them became heads of state and head of the government in their respective country. You can imagine the influence that it has on their perception about a country where they were educated. Are we thinking about reviving that possibility in which we should invite as many students as possible, offer them studies in India, try to train them in India, so that when they go back home, they become our own real ambassadors, the brand equity ambassadors, who will actually think India and also participate in the domestic affairs of that particular country, is something which I would like to know. Sir, there was an initiative which was taken, Indian Ocean Rim Initiative. I would like to know from the Minister, because we hardly nowadays don't listen too much about it. Of course, too many initiatives does not really mean anything. It can just not result into any concrete action. But that was a very interesting initiative, the Indian Rim Association initiative, because that Indian Rim countries initiative, because actually speaking, that is really a history and tradition that we had. So many people are located in those countries. So I would like to know, I realize, sir, that I have taken time. But sir, I will conclude. And therefore, I am just saying that whether this initiative also, how far it has developed, whether any change in that is something which you like to know. Sir, India has been demanding, and rightfully so, as a matter of right, it is not that we are expecting any favor from any other country, that India should be a part of a reformed UN system in which the Security Council will be expanded, and India will rightfully have a major role to play as a permanent member, enjoying same rights as the present permanent members of the Security Council they have, including the right to veto. Now, there was a committee which was appointed by the UN Secretary General to look into this issue. They have submitted a report. The report, unfortunately, does not provide that type of a status to India which India deserves. I would like to know how we are going to ensure that India's interest will be protected. UN will be reformed, has to be reformed, because the rest of the world, UN is asking them to reform, and the UN itself does not get reformed, does not really make any sense. Therefore, UN must be reformed, but in that reformed UN, how India will occupy the position that it deserves is something, and how the government will really take into confidence, I would like to know. And sir, the last point, and I will conclude. Sir, there was a talk about India is a sufferer of attacks of terrorists from many, many years. Many innocent people have lost their lives. We are concerned about what is happening in Iraq. So many innocent people are dying. But the same way, we should be also concerned and should be sensitive to the innocent people dying in our own territory. Many people have died, including our Indian Parliament was attacked by the terrorists. So we are concerned about it. The terrorism, in our own opinion, doesn't start with 9/11. Whereas America thinks that the beginning of terrorism is 9/11, and therefore that's the history, the beginning of the history. We have been suffering from terrorism. Therefore, I would like to know how are we building up a coalition of countries around this very important theme of terrorism, anti-terrorism theme, because this is an extremely important thing. In the changed world, we must ensure that all those countries are committed to work against terrorism, because terrorism is something which affects the common man, the innocent people, and the countries who cannot afford to resist them. US has ability to resist, but countries which are poor, like don't possess that much doesn't possess that much financial capital, are the sufferers of the most. And therefore, I would like to know how are you building the coalition against that. I wish that this particular discussion, as I said, should be a periodic affair wherein the foreign policy will be debated in Indian Parliament. All of us will be able to express our views, and we must ensure that foreign policy is something which is beyond politics, of domestic politics of India. In a sense that we should not try to attack the government just because we are in opposition, and the government should not try to find fault with the opposition just because they are now in the government, because foreign policy has to be durable, stable, and should be able to carry it forward as a means of promoting national interest, and therefore we would like to support and find out how the policy is going to help that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.